let's talk about winter. And so I've actually been really enjoying preparing for this one, is just sort of researching and updating my knowledge and just sort of, I guess, as much as anything, collating my thoughts around winter and how to be healthy through winter. And so this has been fun and I've been enjoying it. And I've really, a lot of this is based, as I sort of mentioned in some of the promos, on, the evolutionary history of winter, right? Like what were we as a species? How did we evolve? How did we deal with winter? What did we have to deal with in winter? What did we evolve to do during winter? And so I guess the first thing to note about that, as we just mentioned, people tuning in from around Australia and around the world, is that winter wasn't the same everywhere, right? And so often we have this idea, people will talk about the paleo diet or a paleo diet or an evolutionary diet or evolutionary lifestyle, and it kind of gives this impression that there is that it was the same everywhere and that everyone evolved the same. And so the reality is that that's not true, right? Winter was different everywhere. If you were tuning in now, summer, I could probably ask you what temperature it is up there. But depending on where you're tuning in from, the climate is going to be somewhat different, all right? And so some of what I'll be talking about today, I guess, comes from the evolutionary past of many of us, which is in kind of a European theme, right? So many Australians did originally have at least some part of their background coming from Europe, but I understand that many Australians had some part of their background coming from elsewhere as well, and perhaps from more tropical climes. And so the challenge, I guess, we have is that we don't all always know exactly where all of our history came from. And I know nowadays you can find that out more and more. But I know, at least for my family, it's pretty diverse. Like we have history. I mean, part of my family is very Australian and very English, because one of my ancestors came out on the first official ship to come out to South Australia. But then there's a lot of other, mixed. There's some German in there. There's some Jewish in there. There's some, all different origins in terms of my ancestors and my family. So. It's easy. I guess the point is, what I'm going to be talking about today is, I guess, some generalities around winter and around evolution that may make some sense for most of us. But as with everything in terms of the paleo diet or the paleo lifestyle or the evolutionary lifestyle, we have to understand that there was no sort of one size fits all. There are some, I think, overarching principles that can be really useful. And that we can learn from and that we can incorporate into our lifestyle, and at the same time we can have some variety within that. I often talk about, from a dietary perspective, the difference in diet between an Inuit population who ate enormous amounts of fat and blubber versus some of the Papua New Guinean tribes who ate 80% sweet potatoes. And so, both of those were Paleolithic tribes, or at least living a tribal lifestyle. Yet their consumption was vastly different. So there is, as I said, within the framework of, I think, what is a sensible evolutionary approach, there's some room for variation within that as well. Summer says 13 degrees at the moment. That's actually pretty chilly for up there, Summer. So you might relate to some of this more than I thought. It's warmer in Adelaide than it is in Queensland. Jeepers, I didn't think that ever happened. Well, no, that happens in summer. We get stinking hot here in summer. But I didn't think that ever happened in winter. Hello, Debbie, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. Thanks for coming on board. So, let's talk about the evolutionary history of winter. And so, my kids and I have been reading over the last few years as bedtime story, the Clan of the Cave Bear book series. I don't know if you guys have if any of you have read that. It is somewhat of an adult book series, so I will say up front, I do skip some sections as I'm reading it to the kids, but it does contain a lot of interesting information and a lot of factually correct information about how Paleolithic and even Neanderthal tribes might have lived and survived and cooked and made clothes and made shelters and all those sort of things back in the day. And so it's fascinating. It's a great read, and the kids actually really enjoy it. We're almost coming to the end of it now. But one of the things they talk about is I guess, the way that our ancestors dealt with winter, and particularly European winters, because obviously, much of Europe was very, very cold in winter. Much of it was covered in snow and ice in winter, particularly from our historical past, where there was more ice and more glaciers that had a greater impact on the climate and on the environment. And so as a result of that, winter was often a time of low food availability and low food variety, right? And especially when we're talking about, fruits and vegetables, but also, in regards to, meat and other animal products as well, just due to the challenges of the climate that often, there's actually some interesting research that came out just recently suggesting that some of the humans in the more extreme climates may have actually hibernated. So that was a study that just came out recently, within the last couple of weeks. I was actually planning on doing that as perhaps my podcast show this week. But suggesting that humans may have actually slowed themselves right down, possibly even to the point of hibernation. And the way they showed that was that they had very limited, they looked at their bone growth and showed that during those winter months there was very, very limited bone growth. And as you may know, your bones are constantly being resorbed and reformed. And so they were able to show that the potential is there that the humans were actually hibernating. But whether they were hibernating or not, we know that they were slowing down. They were spending more time indoors, no doubt less time out hunting and foraging, and relying on food stores, and also relying more on an animal-based diet and probably some of those root vegetables that may well have stayed, that sort of come in sort of late summer and autumn, and can often keep for an extended period of time, especially in those colder climates through the winter months. So it was a time of low food availability and low food variety, as I've mentioned. It was definitely a time of lower carbohydrate availability. So whilst we do have some of those slower carbohydrates in terms of some of those root vegetables, in terms of things like fruit particularly, but also some of the other sort of more carby vegetables, or some of the more sugary vegetables, then they may have been less available during those winter months. There would have been a time of leaner meats. And so the animals were sort of in the same conditions and exposed to the same environment. And so they would also tend to fatten up during spring, put on a decent amount of fat storage, and then utilize that during the winter months when there was less food available. And as a result, they would burn off that fat, and that fat would then, they would then become leaner in terms of the meat. So, probably a higher protein consumption and a lower fat and carbohydrate consumption would have been the norm during those winters. It's definitely a time of cold exposure. So as I said, it's a bit chilly here in Adelaide. I've got my beanie on, but I don't have the air conditioning on because I actually quite like getting a little bit of cold exposure. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of ways to thrive through winter. But, there was also less sun, obviously, during winter. And what sun there is during winter is obviously weaker as a result of the angle of the sun having to pass through more atmosphere to get to us, meaning that it is weaker in winter. Possibly limited movement as a result, in fact almost certainly limited movement throughout winter as a result of that sort of partial hibernation we spoke about earlier. So I think as a natural thing, it would be normal for us to feel less like moving and less like exercising through the winter months, and I think many can relate to that. However, we'll talk a little bit later about what it might look like as a modern hybrid in our modern world, because I think the way that we live through winter is quite different to the way that our ancestors would have lived through winter as a result of many of our modern conveniences. And there's also a natural urge, I think, to overeat through spring, through winter, through autumn, right? So particularly, I think, autumn and winter, there's an opportunity there as we know that winter's coming in, that our body's going to want to try and store some fat. I think I said earlier storing fat during spring. Anyway, I was meaning autumn, obviously preparing for winter. Anyway, So yeah, definitely I think autumn and winter is the time when we would have wanted to consume extra food. We kind of naturally, our bodies are wanting to prepare for what is essentially an extended, well, not a fast, but a period of less food availability. And then, throughout winter, I think it would be natural, knowing that there's less food availability, for us to want to consume everything we get a chance to consume and try and store that as much as is possible as well. So I think that's my kind of short rundown of what it might have looked like in our evolutionary past in regards to winter. And so now we're going to have a little bit of a chat about what that might look like for us now as we move forwards. Understanding, as I said, that we don't live in the same conditions, that we do have modern conveniences, and that changes, I think, the way we do winter. So, a couple of those things, I guess, is that we have, housing, air conditioning, that mean that we can, stay more active if we choose to throughout winter. We have, obviously, unbelievable food availability. That would have just been unknown to our ancestors for us to be able to go and pick up food. As much as we might complain about food prices or food shortages or the price of lettuce, the very fact that we can just go and get lettuce at this time of year from the supermarket, and it's always available for the most part. I know it hasn't always been of recent times, but for the most part it's always available, and if that's not available, there's a whole supermarket full of other stuff available that we can consume as much as we want or as much as we can afford all year round. Means that we are in a very different environment to what we would have been. So, I think what's natural for our bodies is to have a large adaptive range. And there's a lot of research coming out recently about adaptive range, whether people are talking about adaptive range in terms of temperature, so, cold therapy, heat therapy, all those sort of things. Adaptive range in terms of, foods that you're eating and, perhaps even fluctuating between them. And if you look at it from once again, an evolutionary perspective, there is that natural seasonal change where, as the fruits and vegetables come in, we're going to eat more carbohydrates. As the animals move through and fatten up on all the, the grasses, the spring grasses, then we're going to consume more fats. There is a natural variation that happens throughout the year that I think would naturally have created an adaptive range for us. There's a natural fluctuation in the amount of sunlight that we get. There's a natural variation in the amount of exercise and movement we would have done. All of these things I think are natural variations that actually were most likely good for our body, that enabled our body to develop a degree of adaptability and a degree of resilience that may in some ways be missing in our modern world. All right. So, but the modern hybrid of how we do that, I think, needs to be different. I think as a result of the availability of food in our modern world, I do think that we need to modify that approach. Because we do have more food available to us, a greater range of food available to us, and we have a natural propensity to want to eat it and to store it over winter, then I think it makes sense that in our modern world we probably need to move more, to burn more calories through winter, rather than just hibernating as we perhaps would have in our Paleolithic past, in order to maintain a healthier balance between intake and outtake. So, and I think we need to be mindful of what it is that we are consuming. I think it makes sense, and we'll talk about this more in a second, but I think, making sure we're consuming healthy fats, making sure we're consuming, seasonally appropriate fruits and vegetables, and particularly vegetables in that case, and particularly starchy vegetables, as we'll talk about. It makes sense to eat in a way that's congruent with the season and allow our body to have that variation and that flux that is natural for it. So that's where I think this modern hybrid can come in. So we're just going to talk about a few things with that. Sunlight obviously is a big one in winter in terms of our winter health. There is just so much research coming out at the moment about vitamin D and the benefits of vitamin D for so many different things in terms of your brain function, in terms of your immune system, in terms of just, so many processes throughout your body. And so I think, understanding the benefits of sunlight is really important. Understanding that in our modern world, we don't get outside as much as we probably would have previously, that we do spend a lot of indoor time, especially during the day at work, that sort of stuff. We probably are more clothed than we would have been. We expose less of our skin to the sunlight as well. And so I think that does mean that even in winter, we need to get our skin exposed to the sunlight as much as we can to try and keep our vitamin D up. We also need to make sure, be really conscious that we're consuming those healthy fats, because vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient, and we need having those healthy fats in our diet helps us maintain a healthy vitamin D level, even though most of it is produced by our body rather than consumed by our body. We still need to have those healthy fats in order to adequately produce the right amounts of vitamin D. And once again, in our modern world, with our modern lifestyle, that might be one that you want to monitor. You might want to get that checked and see where your vitamin D level is, and then adjust your lifestyle accordingly, or perhaps even supplement in order to keep that at an appropriate level, because that is, as I said, a really important one, and it's just showing up in more and more research all the time as an important one in terms of our health. So that's sunlight. As I said, exercise becomes really important, particularly when we're not getting enough sunlight and we're not getting outside as much as we'd like to. So we know that for many people, that their moods can get really affected in winter. And there's a number of ways we can help with that in terms of, as I said, the vitamin D is definitely one of those, but also in terms of getting some exercise during winter, getting that serotonin happening, it can be really important. So getting the right amount of exercise, obviously, as we know, if you do too much, you can burn yourself out and make matters worse. If you go too little, then you're not getting that stimulation, that serotonin, you're not getting that positive effect on your mental well-being of that exercise. So, from a dietary perspective, as we were talking about, eating healthy fats is really important. Obviously, in terms of the vitamin D, which is a fat-soluble nutrient, but also in terms of things like omega-3s, which are super important for your brain. And once again, as we know, many people do have challenges, particularly in terms of their moods and depression and seasonal affective disorder and those sort of things through winter. And so giving those nutrients to our brains through winter is really important. We do need to make sure we're consuming enough protein during winter. And as I said before, this is something that we would likely have been doing pretty well in our evolutionary past, because we know that during winter was a time when the animals were leaner, and as a result, that was a time when we were, as a percentage of our calories, likely consuming more protein, because we weren't getting a lot of fat on our animals. We weren't getting a lot of fruits during winter. Even, if we have snow-covered grounds, we possibly weren't even getting a lot of, sort of leafy greens or vegetables or those sort of things. Yeah, it really would have been the root vegetables, and it would have been the meats that we were consuming. So I'm just jumping across to my Dr. Brett Hill page now, because I can see that there are a couple of comments there. And I can see a comment there from you, Summer, asking if I can see the comments now, and I can see a hi from Felicity and a hi from Debbie. So hi guys. I don't know why the comments aren't coming through inside the event, but they're just not right now. So hopefully that's coming up soon. I will perhaps try and jump across and see the comments on the other page as we're going along, and see if I can do it that way. Anyway. But yes, protein is really important, and particularly protein is really important for your immune system, all right? And so you do need to have enough protein in your diet in order for your immune system to function well, and you need to make sure you're getting your zinc, which, a great source. Those meats are a great source of zinc as well. Now I can see from my end that my video is just slowing down a little bit. And so I'm not sure why that is, but I might just have to close out of that page. All right, here we go. All right, I'm back. I've got the comments. I can see your comments. I can see who's viewing, and we're all good. So whatever it just did, it slowed down a little bit, and now it's caught up. So welcome back, everybody. I can see you now, and we'll keep going. So yes, ensuring you're getting enough protein and ensuring you're getting the right levels of zinc are both really important for your immune system, and so they're important things to be mindful of during winter. And the easiest way to do that is consuming animal products. And so if you're not consuming animal products, then you just need to be mindful that you are getting a broad range of proteins and a good variety of amino acids in your diet, and mindful that you are consuming foods that are going to keep your zinc levels up. Okay. Leafy greens are great during winter. I think they are something that's pretty hardy. You get your folic acid from that, which once again is really important for your health. You're getting your magnesium from that, which is important for your brain and for your nervous system. So making sure you're getting those leafy greens as part of your diet during winter. Once again, it's like your classic winter foods, right? Like if you went to your great grandma and said, "What do you eat during winter?" I feel like you'd be pretty spot on in terms of the diet. It's like lean meats, it's healthy fats, less carbohydrates, root vegetables, citrus fruits, right? So it really is, it really is that good old-fashioned advice. Felicity's asking a good serving size of protein during winter. I think that's really individual, Felicity. I think it depends what you're doing. Particularly what sort of exercise you're doing. I think, once again, and different people, different body types thrive on, I think, different amounts of protein, right? So I would suggest that the protein serving size for myself, I like to do a lot of resistance exercise. I like to do a lot of, using those big muscles. And so I would have, probably a couple of 100 grams of protein a couple of times a day at least. Whereas, okay, so Felicity's saying 2 kids that do winter sports, once again, depending on their age and what sort of sports they're doing, but, I do think you want to give them a decent serve of protein at least a couple of times a day. And so that might mean lunch and dinner, that might mean breakfast and dinner, obviously the serving size will depend on their age and their consumption. In terms of a volume on the plate, I'd be thinking it's like half of the plate is going to be those proteins, particularly during winter. And so obviously that might be, less in terms of calories, but in terms of, volume on the plate, that's how I'd be thinking about it. So then also during winter, it is naturally a time of less sugar and carb consumption, and I think that once again makes sense, because we need to be careful of those carb crashes because they can really impact our moods during winter as well. And as well, I think it is just a natural time to sort of cycle through that, to have a period throughout the year where we are consuming less carbohydrates, and I think there's some good evidence coming out saying that maybe taking a slightly cyclical approach to our carb consumption might be beneficial, once again the answer is already there in our evolutionary past in terms of how that was done, and so I think mimicking that does kind of make sense. As I've already mentioned several times, consuming the root vegetables during winter, beets, sweet potato, these are naturally high in things like folate, high in fibre, high in vitamin C, high in antioxidants. All of these things are going to be great for our body, great for our immune systems throughout winter, and they are a slower carbohydrate, right? And so I think that is, once again, that sort of natural cycle of our body to slow down a little bit during winter. I think that natural transition to the slower carbohydrates, as I'm not a super low carb dieter, but I live on a property that has lots of fruit in summer, and beautiful fruit and cherries and blackberries and mulberries and all of the apples and pears that grow in our trees, and I definitely consume those when they're in season in pretty significant volume, and I'm totally okay with that. But then during winter is when I really dial back on that, and I try and deliberately do that and have less of those, because I think, once again, I think that is a really natural cycle. Unfortunately on our property, our citrus hasn't quite come through yet, so we have planted an orange and a lemon tree with the aim of having some more of that to consume throughout winter. which once again is important in terms of vitamin C for your immune system and getting enough fibre. And so, whilst we don't have those growing on the trees yet, we hopefully will in the next couple of years. But those are certainly things that we would buy in order to consume during winter to keep us healthy, and to look after our bodies and to look after our immune systems. So once again, I think if you looked at this diet and you showed it to your great-grandma, she'd just kind of go, yeah, that's winter. That's what you do. That's winter foods. That's just the way you go. And really, if you look at it, one of the easiest ways to consume these foods, and probably in an appropriate quantity, and a great way of doing it in a really nourishing, a really healthy, a really satiating way, is going to be soups and stews, right? And then the beauty of soups and stews is they can be done really cheaply. You can use those cheaper cuts of meat, and you can add in those root vegetables that are in season, and you can put in a little bit of greens and all that. You can make a really, really nourishing, really healthy food that just feels right in winter when it's cold. And I think that's a great way to do it, and it doesn't have to take forever. Like, we're so lucky nowadays that we have recipes. I know I've got a recipe that I do in my Thermomix, and I'm lucky to have a Thermomix because I know those are expensive and not everyone has one, but I've got a great chicken soup recipe that can be just knocked up in, half an hour or less. And I think there's probably benefit in doing soups and stews in the slow cooker over a longer period of time, in terms of drawing out some of those nutrients and perhaps adding in some bones and some broth, those sort of things. But it's also nice sometimes when you are a little bit time poor to be able to do it a little bit quicker as well, and still get some great value, right? So those are some of my thoughts on wintry diets. Giving your body lots, and Felicity's like, yum, I know. I might have to put up inside the Healthy Lifestyle Choices group that chicken soup recipe, because I can't remember where I got it from, but it's a really good one. Anyway, those are my thoughts around diet. The other big one during winter is hydration, right? And so one of the important things about hydration is helping to protect your mucous membranes, which is like your throat, your sinuses, those first layers of your immune system. And one of the reasons it's so important, the hydration is just important anyway. Your body is a huge percentage of your body is actually water. And so making sure you're getting enough water in is really good for your body, but particularly at this time of year, for your sinuses, for your mucous membranes. And many people will recognize this, and I often recognize it, is that when the time of the year comes that we start cranking on the air conditioners and the heaters, and they can be actually really dehydrating, is that we do notice that our sinuses play up a little bit, and you might be prone to some congestion as a result of that. And so I do notice each season, the first couple of weeks, that the air conditioner is getting pumped, and it does tend to get pumped pretty at our place, that does affect, and I start to notice that in my sinuses. So making sure we're drinking enough water. It's easy to sort of fall off the wagon as it starts to get cold, and not think about consuming water. But also finding the right balance in terms of your home. So one of the things you want to look at is the humidity in your home. I actually just went out this week, and this is purely coincidence. It wasn't because I was researching for this workshop, but I went out this week and bought a humidity meter from Bunnings. It cost about $30, and you can then measure the humidity in your home, and that'll allow us to see. And you want to try and, if you can, try and keep that at around about 50%. Right now, I know that that for many people. Well, first of all, I know that naturally there would be, once again, variation and fluctuation in that, and I think that's probably good as well. But what can happen in once again, our modern world, in these controlled environments, is that they can either become really humid, and sometimes that's because we're running our dryer inside, maybe we're drying clothes inside, maybe it's just a really, there's a well, there's a sink of water somewhere in and around your home that's not, draining as it naturally would on a dirt floor, perhaps. We can end up with quite high humidity. Or on the flip side, if we're cranking the air conditioner and that's really drying things out, or even cranking the air conditioner and that's drying things out in summer, then we can actually end up with really low humidity, and it can be unnaturally high or low the whole time. So I know I just looked at our house this week, and the humidity in our house is about 75%, so it's actually really high. And so we are at the moment looking at possibly getting a dehumidifier to put into the home and to try and bring that down and just to sort of monitor that and to see how that goes. And obviously one of the reasons for that is, as I said, if it gets too low and you really dry out, then that can really affect your sinuses, that can affect you, it can dehydrate your body, it can affect your skin, can affect all sorts of things. If it's too high, then obviously the risk of mold and all of the health impacts of mold, which are now becoming more and more well known, we need to look out for as well. So, it's a bit of a balancing act, but because we have this unnatural environment that can tend to be, constantly one way or the other, then it's something to keep an eye on and to sort of aim to be in that sort of 50% range. And I think then if you're in that 50% range, and if sometimes during one season it's a little bit higher, sometimes during one season it's a little bit lower, then that's good. That's probably more of a natural variation. But if it's always higher, then you're going to have that risk of that mold really developing and growing and spreading and getting more stronger and stronger season on season. And if it's always really low, then that's going to tend to really dehydrate and dry out your body as well. So someone says, I have sinusitis, I'm used to it even when I'm not sick. And so summer, that is, the humidity of your home could be one factor in that that might be worth looking into. Obviously, diet can come into that. The function of your upper neck and your cranials in terms of the ability for those sinuses to drain can come into that. But those are all, but definitely the humidity is one that might be worth looking at. Cold exposure, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's good for us to have cold exposure during winter or whenever cold season is for you. Once again, I think we can tend to be sheltered from those seasonal variations and those temperature variations. And, I guess what we're seeing from kind of the biohacking world is that there is benefit to being hot sometimes and there's benefit to being cold sometimes. And that has different effects on our bodies, on our metabolisms, on our minds, our mental health, our overall well-being. There's certainly a lot of anecdotal evidence and some sort of research evidence started to come out to show that. So, I think exposing yourself to the cold in a safe way during winter is a good idea, and not trying to just constantly keep things the same all year round and just cranking the air conditioner and avoiding outside. I think getting out into the cold, allowing the room to be a little bit cold, maybe not sticking on the air conditioner straight away as soon as you get home, but actually just dealing with it a little bit and acknowledging that variation might actually be good for you is probably something we could benefit from doing more of, I think. Keeping on socialising, once again, we've spoken a bit tonight about the mental side of winter, because I know that for many people, winter does really affect them from a mental perspective. And so it is, I think, important that we do socialise. Once again, it would have probably been a natural evolutionary time when we were kind of perhaps stuck inside in our cave or in our shelter or whatever that happened to be. We might have actually been socialising more than we were in summer. And so, catching up with people, maybe going camping, combine a few of these together. Head out camping in winter, have a fire. Fires are great. But also, get a bit cold. Get a bit of socialisation, get your body out, get into the fresh air, get some sunlight. You may be able to combine a whole bunch of these benefits by getting out and going camping during winter. I know we certainly had a camping trip planned within the last couple of weeks, which unfortunately I had a few car issues and we didn't get to go. We're going to go down to the Coorong in South Australia, which is a really unique part of the world, and I'm a bit gutted that we missed out on it, but we will do it again another time in another winter. So getting outside, as I just mentioned, as much as possible, getting the fresh air, getting the sunlight, getting the increasing your adaptive range, and then sleeping well, obviously, during winter. So making sure that when you do go to bed, that you do take advantage of the fact that it naturally gets darker earlier and stays darker later in the mornings. And so winter, I think, is a time where perhaps we're not designed to totally hibernate, but we probably are designed to get a little bit more sleep in winter because of those natural variations and those natural cycles. And as I said, because it is a time where we tend to slow down a little bit. Once again, I feel like maybe that happens a little bit less in our modern world because of the way that we control our environment in terms of work and in terms of lighting and in terms of temperature, in terms of what we eat, all of those things. But I still think that prioritising our sleep and making sure we're getting great sleep during winter is going to be really important for our health, really important for our mental health, really important for our immune systems. But also, if winter is a time to sort of shelter in a little bit, then it's going to be a great time to keep your mind active and to be learning. And once again, this is a great way to be stimulating the mind, to keeping your mind active, to keep your mind healthy. So, you might be reading a book, you might be playing a puzzle, you might be learning a new art or craft, you might be studying something, whatever it is. I think winter is a great time to do that and a great time to keep your mind active. So those are my thoughts on the way we can create, I guess, as I said, kind of a modern hybrid of health in winter. I don't think we are ever going to be going back to, perhaps hibernating as we may have in the past, or even slowing down as much as we may have in the past. We're never going to go back to the limits of food availability that happened in the past, or the limits of food variety that were available in the past. And so as a result, I think we do need to make a little bit of a hybrid where we probably also then need to be a little bit more physically active in winter than we perhaps would have been from an evolutionary perspective in order to keep that balance right. And at the same time, I think the more we can try and mimic that natural winter cycle and allow our body to have that variation where we do have, as I said, probably a little bit more protein, maybe the same amount of fats, maybe slightly less fats, certainly a little bit less in terms of the carbohydrates and the fruits, and have those sort of seasonally appropriate foods in terms of lean meats, root vegetables, citrus fruits, having some soups and stews, exposing ourselves to that winter environment. I think these are the ways that we can try and mimic that natural winter cycle, and I think that's the best way to keep our bodies thriving through winter. So hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. If you guys have got any questions, then by all means jump in now and let me know. I know you've asked a couple as we've gone along. I'm just looking back now. Summer, I will. I'm pretty sure the recipe I've got for these chicken soup summer can easily be done without a Thermomix. It probably just takes a little bit longer, but I don't think it's a big difference. It's not one that really gets sort of blended up or anything in the Thermomix. So it would, I think, be really easy actually to do just in a pot on the stove. And it is delicious. I'm actually salivating a little bit now and craving it. So I will, when I get home, I'll get that recipe card and I'll take a photo of it and I'll put it on the group. And if I forget to do it tonight, then I'm sure some of you will remind me and make sure that I do it in the next couple of days. But yes, otherwise, it doesn't look like anyone's got any questions at this stage. Once again, if you're listening to this video on recording and you do have questions or comments that you want to make, then the best way to do that is to head to my Healthy Lifestyle Choices group. So just look up Healthy Lifestyle Choices on Facebook, answer a couple of questions, and you can join. Felicity says, do you have a link to the group? I will get a link to the group right now, Felicity, and I will put it in the comments here. I really should have this organised before we start each time, because I do get this same question each time. And let me just grab it now. But of course I don't, because, I'm not the most technologically savvy person in the world, and I'm not always the most organised, detail-oriented person in the world, as Summer could definitely attest. And so I will grab it for you now. Where do I find the link? No. All right, hang on. I'll just grab this link because that'll send you there. All right, here is the link. Great. There we go. There you go. All right, so you should be able to just click there and request access to the group. But yeah, for those of you who are listening to the replay, maybe you're on YouTube, maybe you're on one of the other Facebook groups, maybe someone's just shared this for you. It's facebook.com/groups/Healthy Lifestyle Choices with Dr. Brett Hill. And that's just DR for Dr. Brett Hill. So that's /Healthy Lifestyle Choices with Dr. Brett Hill. But as I said, if you just go into Facebook and you just click on the little search icon and type in Healthy Lifestyle Choices, it should come up. and you should see a picture of me there so you know it's the right group and you can ask to join. All right. Anyway, enjoy your winter evening, guys. I hope you are enjoying the weather. I hope you are enjoying the cold. I hope you're having a nice nourishing soup or a stew and getting some movement in your day tomorrow. And have a great evening, and I'll speak to you soon.